In today's video, we're covering which Titan exotics are the best and which ones are the worst in Destiny 2 with a tier list. Now, when making a tier list like this, there are so many different variables to consider. Are we ranking these exotics for PvE or PvP or maybe Gambit? Are we assessing their viability in low-end content like strikes, or are we focusing primarily on the high-end content like raids and dungeons and Grandmaster Nightfalls? For this video specifically, we will be focusing on exotic Titan armor for PvE and ranking them in order of their viability in challenging endgame content. I used a team of people that I have all with 10,000 plus hours playtime in Destiny 2 to ensure that all of these opinions are as accurate as possible. Now let's jump right into it. We're going through all the exotic Titan armor pieces from chronological order in your collections. So first up is an insurmountable skull fort. While this is a fun exotic and actually plays its role perfectly well, you can basically just run around and infinitely spam shoulder charges as long as you're killing ads. It tends to work significantly better in low-end content like strikes, or if you're running a story mission, as opposed to high-end content like raids, dungeons, and grandmasters. If you try to take this into some high-end content, you'll notice that you just won't be able to one-hit kill those ads, so you'll either have to weaken them before shoulder charging them, which kind of defeats the purpose altogether. Its health regen is actually quite nice, but it pairs significantly better with Fist of Havoc than it does with Thunder Crash, and given the current PvE meta right now, Fist of Havoc is just not nearly as good as Thunder Crash. But if you want to have a lot of fun with an exotic, slap this bad boy on and jump into Gambit, and you'll be able to run around shoulder charge killing all the ads. But for challenging endgame content, we're giving this the B tier rating. Now, moving on to the next exotic, we have Mask of the Quiet One. This exotic is borderline useless, even though it does seem like it would be good. It says it gives you health regen and ability regeneration, which upon initial review, you'd think, wow, that could work really well. But it isn't until you test this thing out that you find out that the health regen is actually only your health and not shield, so it will only heal you that first 70 HP. It will not restore your shields at all, which means it's only going to restore your health enough so that you get one shot in the Grandmaster or whatever challenging endgame activity you're doing. And the ability regen from using this exotic is just not worth it. It's not good. F tier for the Mask of the Quiet One. The next exotic we're talking about is Khepri's Horn. And while this is the ugliest exotic on this entire tier list, it's actually not completely useless like Mask of the Quiet One. It does serve its purpose in that you can put your Titan wall down, it will clear ads in front of it, and was recently buffed so that it does add Scorch stacks to those enemies. However, for some bizarre reason, Bungie didn't give it enough Scorch stacks so that it could ignite enemies. If it could, this thing would be absolutely amazing and so much fun to use, but instead you place a wall down, it sends out 2 fire waves, they go out, they come back, Scorch is applied but no ignitions, and it's just really not that strong. So the Khepri's Horn gets the C tier placement. The next exotic we're talking about is the Helm of Saint 14. The Helm of Saint 14 is a really good exotic to have on when you have your bubble and when you place it down, but when you don't have your super, it serves no purpose, and in most challenging content, you're not switching your exotic armor piece, and in Grandmasters you can't, so being stuck with Saint 14 can suck in most of those situations. However, the ability to leave your bubble and have that overshield and having enemies enter it and getting blinded does have some seriously good utility, which is why we're putting it in the B tier ranking. The next exotic we're talking about is the Eternal Warrior. The Eternal Warrior was recently reworked and is significantly stronger now than it was before. However, one of the biggest downsides for Eternal Warrior is that you cannot use it with Thunder Crash. All of its reworked capabilities do not work when you have Thunder Crash equipped. If that wasn't the case, then it would definitely be an A tier exotic. It increases your weapon damage by 25%, which does not stack with surges, and that paired with the overshield that it gives you, we're going to give this a B tier ranking. Now, moving on to the next exotic, we have the One-Eyed Mask. This is an exotic that you would use in PvE specifically for survivability. Its overshield that it awards you is not actually a void overshield though, unfortunately, so it doesn't give you damage resist. And because there are various other survivability options that outclass this exotic, we're going to put it in the B tier ranking and move on to the next exotic, which is Precious Scars. Have you ever had to do an activity with someone who's extremely underleveled or very new to the game? Next time you do, try equipping the exotic helmet Precious Scars. Every single time that blueberry dies, you'll revive them and you will turn into an absolute healing machine. This exotic is extremely epic and very underrated. The only caveat with it is that you have to have teammates die, so if you're playing with good teammates, I would highly recommend to not use Precious Scars. And if your teammates are having an issue with survivability, they might want to equip the next exotic that we're going to be talking about, which is the Lorelei Splendor Helmet. The Lorelei Splendor Helmet is easily one of the best exotics for survivability in Destiny 2, and I was very, very close to giving it the S tier ranking, but the only reason I did it is because Synthoceps on Solar Titan severely outclasses using the Lorelei Splendor, and while it is the absolute best exotic for just passive survivability, Solar Titan has access to sunspots and healing nades to add built-in survivability to the subclass, making Lorelei Splendor not as necessary to use as a lot might might assume. And the next exotic we're going to be talking about is the Cadmus Ridge Lance Cap. This exotic Titan helmet is specifically for Behemoth, which is one of the worst subclasses at this point in time. And on top of that, it's centered around lances. While they are very fun to use, they really aren't that strong, especially in challenging endgame PvE. And while this exotic can be fun for making a few lances here or there, there's really no point in using it because you can just run a stasis weapon and make tons of lances left and right. So for that reason, we are giving it the D tier ranking. And the next exotic we're talking about is the ACD feedback fences. This is an exotic that you will rarely ever see used in PvE because its exotic trait involves getting meleeed, which is almost never a good idea in challenging endgame content because a lot of things will one-hit kill you. But even still, if the damage from receiving those melees was strong enough from feedback fence to kill the red bar enemies, then it would almost potentially be worth it, but it's not. It doesn't even kill them. So we have to give this the D tier ranking. But unlike the ACD feedback, the next exotic we're going to talk about is extremely good for ad clear. The Doomfang pauldrons make it so you can throw tons and tons of shields when you're in your super, extending that super like crazy, and this is unbelievably good ad clear. However, it does require you to use your super and spec this exotic armor piece when using your super, so overall it's going to get the B tier ranking. But the next exotic we're talking about is going to be the first one that gets the S tier ranking, one of the strongest exotic armor pieces in the game that makes almost every Titan subclass good, and that is Syntheseps. The Syntheseps are an S tier exotic because they strengthen your melee, and when you're on Titan, you're on the melee subclass. Your entire identity, no matter what subclass you're on, is centric around melees. So giving a massive buff to melee damage is always a good idea. And while previously in the past you probably wouldn't want to be surrounded by enemies, with Bungie's changes to resilience that give us now currently 30% damage resistance, our survivability when surrounded by ads is better than ever. Along with that, using this on a solar subclass, which is my personal favorite, equals infinite sunspots for survivability, and you can throw a healing nade down in case you ever get in trouble. But it's not exclusive to the solar subclass. These are extremely good for shield bash on Void Titan as well, and even Strand Titan with Flechette Storm is really strong with Syntheseps. If you don't have at least 2 Titan builds saved with Syntheseps, you're honestly playing Destiny 2 wrong. But this isn't the only S tier exotic armor piece that we're going to be covering. The next one is also S tier, and that is the Aeon Safe exotic gauntlets. Now initially you might be thinking these aren't that powerful, these aren't that strong, and you would be very wrong. One Titan with these on your team in a Grandmaster equals near infinite power for the rest of your fire team. Aeons are undoubtedly an S tier exotic in challenging endgame PvE. The next exotic we're talking about is Ashen Weight, and while Bungie did recently buff the amount of damage that these do, they also nerfed the amount of ability energy you get back from kills with it. So now you basically have to get multiple kills in order to get your grenade back, which makes them not nearly as viable as other exotics in the game, so we're giving them the B tier ranking. And the next exotic we're talking about is Worm God Crest. This exotic will get the current B tier ranking, but it used to be the optimal DPS exotic in the game. If you don't remember the video I made back in the day, you could kill Garan in the dungeon with 2 hits of these solo, but currently they've been nerfed and the timer for these is so low that Syntheseps just simply outclass them. So Worm God Crest gets the B ranking. And the next exotic we're talking about is Ursa Furiosa. This used to be an essential exotic to use when doing stuff like Grandmasters because it was so ridiculously hard to stay alive in some of those activities, but after Bungie changed the resilience in the game, giving everyone initially a 40% damage reduction and now a 30%, Ursas are just not needed anymore. But even though they're not necessary, they still do their role extremely well, so Ursa Furiosa gets the A tier treatment. And the next exotic that we're going to talk about are the Stronghold exotic gauntlets. These things are insanely good. They will give you infinite ×2 restoration, which if you haven't used that before, it is basically God mode in Destiny 2. This exotic specifically works on all subclasses and gives you insanely good survivability, especially when paired with the Lament. And if you want infinite class ability energy when using a Strand Titan, you can use the Throne Cleaver with energy transfer, and when you block with it, it will continuously give you class ability energy, making it so you can keep putting down Titan walls, which will repeatedly suspend enemies nearby you. The Stronghold is absolutely an S tier exotic in Destiny 2 Season 21. The next exotic we're going to be talking about are the Saitan's Ramparts in PvE. Now this is an exotic you're rarely going to see anyone use in PvE because even though you have the ability to shoot through your wall, which sounds really nice, the wall gets shot down so fast that it's just not worth it. This exotic is extremely bad in PvE, but it does do the job that it's looking for, so we won't put it in the F tier ranking, but it is really bad, so we're going to put it in D. And the next exotic that we're covering is the Icefall Mantle. One of the more silly exotics in Destiny 2, you use your Titan wall and you're given an overshield, with the only downside being that you're completely immobilized while doing it. You can only strafe around, which really sucks and is going to make you the target of getting shot by all the enemies in PvE. You can cancel the overshield, and when it breaks, you you are remobilized, but canceling or waiting for the shield to deplete defeats the purpose of using this exotic at all, which is why we're giving this the D tier ranking. The next exotic we're covering is one of my favorites from D1, brought back to D2 recently and was buffed and is so unbelievably strong. We're talking about the no backup plans. Bungie recently reworked these and they are unbelievably strong. Pop your Titan wall, you get an overshield, you do 35% more damage with your shotguns, which means you can easily melt champions and melt bosses, and if in the middle of that you get a kill with your shotgun, you will fully replenish your overshield. No backup plans are so good now, which is why we're giving them the A tier ranking. And the next exotic we're looking at are the exotic gauntlets Second Chance. And while these did recently get buffed, they still just don't have the best uptime, and if you're on Void Titan, you have a lot of really good exotics to compete against. That being said though, it is really good for stunning barrier champions. It does give you your charge back for stunning barrier champions, and it does weaken opponents, so it is a pretty solid exotic overall, which is why we're giving it the B tier ranking. The next exotic we're covering is the Point Contact Cannon Brace, and we are giving it the B tier ranking because it's really good for low end content, not as good for high end content, but it does do its job well in jolting everything, so not a bad exotic overall, and significantly better than the next one we're about to cover, which is the Crest of Alpha LUCKYY. This is just not worth using in PvE at all, especially in challenging endgame content. If you pop your barricade, you're given a very small amount of health, and your super makes a whopping 1 extra orb. The only viability I've ever seen this exotic used in is in swapping to it, placing down an excessive amount of bubbles before an encounter, and then swapping off of it because no one uses this exotic. Alpha LUCKYY gets the F tier ranking. And the next exotic we're going to talk about is easily one of the most fun ones to use, and that is the Actium War Rig. The Actium War Rig makes the sweet business go burr, and is also a solid option when using Xenophage, but currently in the sandbox, neither of those exotic weapons are meta defining, so you definitely don't want to throw on the Actium War Rig in any challenging endgame content, but because it technically fits its role well, I will give it the C tier ranking. And the next exotic we're going to talk about as well is also going to get the C tier ranking, and that is the exotic chest piece, the Hollow Fire Heart. As a disclaimer though, this exotic is really good at doing what it's trying to do. The only problem is that you have to refrain from using your super on the Solar Titan subclass, which is one of your best assets. The Solar Titan super is very strong, and to restrict yourself from using it is a tough trade-off, which is why we're giving it the C tier ranking. And the next exotic we're going to cover is a fan favorite, and I still have absolutely no idea why. That is the exotic chest piece, the Armamentarium. This provides you with the ability to have 2 grenade charges, however, it does not give you 2 grenade charges. It only allows you to hold 2 grenade charges, which in theory is almost useless, because 9 times out of 10, when you do have your grenade fully charged in PvE, you're going to throw it. There's no reason to sit on it or hold it, but sometimes in those rare occasions where you will choose to hold your grenade, or if you want 2 grenades to apply a debuff to an enemy, the Armamentarium has some excellent usage, which is why we're going to give it the C tier ranking, and cross our fingers that Bungie does rework this exotic pretty soon because it could definitely use it. This thing has functioned the exact same way it has since the beginning of Destiny 1, and it's long overdue for Bungie to give the Armamentarium some love. Unlike the next exotic we're talking about, which Bungie absolutely hates more than any other Titan exotic in the game, and that is Heart of Inmost Light. This thing has been absolutely nerfed into the ground. It is a shell of its former self, and even still, after the most harshest nerfs we've ever seen to any exotic armor piece, it's actually still decent. I was debating whether or not to give this the B tier ranking, but considering it both helps with ability regeneration and buffing the strength of your abilities, Heart in the current sandbox definitely deserves to be in the A tier rank. Moving on to the next exotic, we're going to be talking about the Severance Enclosure. Hitting finishers with this exotic on creates small little explosions, but unfortunately they just don't do enough damage for this to be a worthwhile exotic, so we're giving Severance Enclosure the C tier ranking. Now, the next exotic we're going to be talking about is the only exotic you will ever see me use when I'm on an Arc Titan in endgame PvE, and that is the Cuirass of the Falling Star. It has quite possibly the most simplistic application of any exotic armor piece. It make Thunder Crash do more damage. How much damage exactly? Double the normal damage of Thunder Crash, which is why this is so extremely good to use in challenging endgame content. You can use it for one-shotting champions in Grandmaster Nightfalls, or you can just use it for DPS when trying to damage a final boss. Falling Star is always a good option in endgame PvE, and is absolutely an S tier exotic. Unlike the next exotic that we're talking about, which is the Hoarfrost Z. The first downside when using this exotic is that you have to use Behemoth, the weakest subclass of all Titan subclasses in endgame PvE, but if you really like using Behemoth for whatever bizarre reason, this can actually be pretty fun for creating a ton of crystals. So for that reason alone, we will give it the C tier ranking for all those Behemoth mains out there watching, and move on to the next exotic, which is the Titan exotic chest piece, the Arbor Warden. This thing gets the F tier ranking because it's honestly just completely useless. All you can do when using this is take your time Titan wall and yeet it across the map, which currently has no known viability in any challenging endgame content. Simply put, don't use Arbor Warden. Now let's move on to the next exotic. The Lion Rampants are an S tier exotic armor piece for your Titans, especially when doing traversal areas or jumping puzzles. You always want to have a build with Lion Rampants to get through those areas easily. Lion Rampants make jumping puzzles an absolute cakewalk, and for that reason alone, they deserve the S tier treatment. But do keep in mind, as soon as you've made it through the jumping puzzle, you're going to want to take this exotic off. The next pair of exotic boots are quite the opposite though. We're talking about the Peacekeepers. Now, have you ever seen anyone use these in PvE? That's right, you haven't, because they suck. They're extremely good in PvP, but in PvE, they're just absolutely terrible. They don't do anything for your SMG that would add some sort of viability in endgame PvE, and I can honestly see Bungie nerfing these for PvP soon and giving them a PvE buff, because that's a recurring trend that Bungie has been doing lately, and these are by far the #1 most used exotic in PvP, so don't be too surprised if this tier list is remade in the future and Peacekeepers are somewhere near the top. And the next exotic we're going to be talking about are the exotic boots, the Dune Marchers. Now, to be clear, these are decent for low-end content. They will clear ads extremely well. The lightning will chain to a lot of different enemies, but in challenging content, that chain lightning won't kill anything, and unfortunately, they don't jolt enemies. So for that reason, we're going to have to give them the D tier ranking. And the next exotic that we're about to talk about is even worse, and that is the MK44 Stand-Asides. These give you an overshield when running with your shoulder charge, which have absolutely zero viability in endgame PvE. You won't need that overshield. It's not going to be helpful to you in any way. So let's move on to the next exotic, which is the Antaeus Wards. Now, these exotic boots are very, very strong in PvP, but inside PvE, they're not good. The setup to sprint and then slide just to potentially deflect a projectile back to an enemy is not a playstyle that anyone should ever utilize in any sort of challenging content. So we are giving them a hard F tier rating for the Antaeus Wards in PvE. Unlike Antaeus Wards, the next pair of exotic boots we're going to be talking about are surprisingly good, and that is the Peregrine Greaves. These provide an increase to shoulder charge damage, which is actually pretty solid for clearing majors, and if you spec into it correctly by using melee kickstart, you can have an extremely high uptime on your melee, giving you near infinite supercharged shoulder charges. Try saying that 5 times fast. And the next exotic that we're covering is the Phoenix Cradle. These are a really strong support exotic. You make sunspots, your teammates then go through those sunspots, giving you and them Soul Invictus, which gives you increased ability regeneration, makes your supers last longer, and gives you health regeneration. A solid exotic overall, so we're giving it the B tier ranking. And the next exotic that we're talking about just got a harsh nerf from Bungie, and we're talking about the Path of the Burning Step. Even after the harsh nerf, they are still a very solid exotic to use, so we're giving it the A tier ranking. And that brings us to our very last exotic on this tier list, which are the exotic boots, the Abeyant Leap. These are absolutely S tier when using them on Strand Titan, suspending all the targets, giving you woven mail. These are an S tier exotic, undoubtedly. Now that we have successfully ranked every single exotic in the game for endgame PvE, let me know your thoughts down in the comments if you agree or disagree, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe, smash the like button, and click on the screen here to watch another video from this channel. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Later.